Manny, I have a very vivid memory of that was quite some time ago now, exactly how long ago. And I opened the paper one morning, Melbourne's daily newspaper, The Age, and there were you on the front page. And you were telling a shocking story about how you had been sexually abused in Melbourne's Jewish community. This story was a bombshell. I remember just being absolutely enraged, but also extremely in awe of you and your courage. And I imagine at that point, you had already been processing what you'd gone through for some time to arrive at that point in your life when you were prepared to publicly stand up and reveal what had happened and demand justice. Do you want to take us through how you got to that point, perhaps even starting with your family, because I think the kind of background you came from is really relevant here.
But yeah, my background is, I guess, not typical in many ways in Melbourne's ultra-Orthodox community, a family of 17 children. I'm one of 17, and father from Australia, mother from Israel, of Yemenite background, Middle Eastern. Religion was at the core of our foundation, of our day-to-day living. Every aspect of our lives were dictated by religion and done together with the community. So when I was 11 or 12 years old, I was sexually abused by someone in the Jewish blood community with a position of authority of sorts, at least for a younger child within that community. And the first time I was abused was inside a synagogue, but I won't go into details because that matter is currently before the courts. And not after that, I was essentially abused by an individual called David Cyprus, who had an authority figure within the issue to send charge of security and access to the rooms. He used to teach us karate, basically a 12-year-old, 13-year-old boy's dream adult in terms of someone you look up to. So in that case, I was sexually abused by him countless times. Ultimately, he was convicted subsequently, so I can't talk about it in factual terms. But, in 1996, I went to the police to give a statement about what had happened to me in the late 80s by both these individuals. That was ultimately meaningless because the doors were shut in my face, insufficient evidence back then. And also the head rabbi, Rabbi Groner, who was in charge of that community, when I approached him about this, he was saying he was taking care of the issue and discouraging me from going to the police. So essentially, cover up was also involved with the abuse. And subsequently, when I started my career and became a leading figure in the Jewish community from combating anti-Semitism as the head of the Anti-Defamation Commission, and then I became the vice president of the Executive Council of Australian Jury. And I did feel a sense of responsibility then as a leader of the community to take action. If I wasn't going to deal with this issue, then who was? So I did stand up, and that's the article we're referring to. And subsequently, there were many other victims and survivors who went to the police, including against my perpetrators, specifically David Cyprus. There were many who came forward. Ultimately, he was charged in half a year of me going public and released from prison not long ago. I must say, in relation to the other case, my first alleged abuser at this stage was in New York. Recently was arrested by the NYPD, extradited to Australia a few months ago, and court proceedings are currently underway. So over 10 years, it's about 12 years I've been leading organisations in the issue of child sexual abuse, especially in Australia, and subsequently for CSA dealing with it globally. So I'm dealing with this issue in various ways, both from a healing perspective and also to try and make some sort of positive change.
I imagine this is an obvious question, but your trauma, that healing journey, I suspect it was made longer by the fact that there was, as you described it, a community cover-up in the beginning.
When I think back about the actual abuse itself, it was horrific. And the impact of that cannot be underestimated, and I accept all of that. But what was on par with that abuse, at the very least on par, and I speak this on behalf of myself and many other victims and survivors who have endured similar kind of experiences. The lashback, the cover-ups, the intimidation, the attempts to shut down the victims, and in this case, myself, intimidation by community, including leaders from across the world, that is re-abusing at the same level of the initial abuse. And people actually need to be aware of the impact that those types of attitudes and actions, the impact it has on the victim and survivor and their families, whether it's got children, whether it's partners, the parents, siblings, especially when they are still in those communities, whichever community it is. And in my case, I know my parents were impacted by it because of their support for me. Siblings have relationships with people who were directly impacted by some of my actions, whether it's former school principals and senior leaders in our community, the former head of the Orthodox rabbis of Australasia. There's various people who have been impacted. In some most cases, certainly the way I feel, could, correctly, because they behaved in immoral, in some cases, even criminal ways. But I don't necessarily accept that it was wrong to do some of those steps. It was ultimately about accountability, which is critical for victims and survivors. But it's also about protecting our children presently and into the future. So it's not about retribution, and it's not about attacking one religious group or Chabad community, as I was accused and my family was accused of for many years. This was about justice, accountability, and the safety of our children.
Can you talk a little bit about the emotional impact this all had on you? How did it change you and change your life?
Often my life feels paradoxical because of the many successes I've had and the work that I've put in, whether professionally or personally. But then the other side of it is the challenging element that most people don't know about. People make assumptions based on. It's hard sometimes to reconcile the two. And the challenges have been great. I've been public to an extent, and certainly in my book, Who Gave You Permission, I do talk about it very clearly and honestly and forthrightly, because it's something that we do need to talk about. I recall over a decade when I did come out publicly talking about my story, we as a society weren't able to even discuss the issue of child sexual abuse in an open way because people didn't know how to listen to or express those words themselves. Child sexual abuse, it was too overwhelming. And I understand why. But I think it's important. Language is critical. Just like we changed the conversation then over the last decade, it's critical that we change the conversation now in the context of mental health and PTSD. And the reason I'm going there, obviously, we're talking about PTSD Nation as the name of this podcast, because trauma, we all experience trauma in one way, or the majority of us in a society endure some form of trauma, whether it's experiencing losing a loved one in a very early stage or witnessing some sort of car accident or, of course, domestic violence, abuse of any form, the military and terrorism, the list goes on and on. And that's one of the things that I've learned in my journey. And it's been a very difficult journey, and I've gone through, from the very highs, very lows. And I have been diagnosed with PTSD. And I recall when I was diagnosed around 2000, it was an experience that at the time I was too immature to actually comprehend and reflect on it. And therefore, for me, it didn't really mean very much. I was diagnosed PTSD in the context of a victims of crimes and tribunal process. And so it was more a kind of a practical and bureaucratic process that had to be undertaken. But then I remember I had forgotten about that completely. And then in preparation for my court case against David Cyprus, that was about 2012, 2013, I had to review some of the documents and the police statements, etc., that I had previously made. And suddenly I was reading these reports and I saw that I had been diagnosed with PTSD around, 15 years before. And my reaction to that was when I had what I would describe for the first time that I understood what was going on within me was my first recognized panic attack where I just read it. And then emotionally, I just started crying, shaking. And I remember exactly where I was in my old place in Melbourne. And it was Saturday morning and I had to call my then wife because we had kids as well. I said, I have to go out of the house. I just felt claustrophobic. Went out of the house, didn't even know where I was going, and ended up going to a friend's place and just had a really emotional, difficult experience at that moment. And that's when I had understood, obviously, upon reflection afterwards, it gave me a bit of a framework to understand what I've been experiencing over decades, what it means to have PTSD. There's some depression. I was mainly enduring a lot of anxiety. Later on, suicide ideation and other experiences, many other victims and survivors experience through their lives. And it really is about accepting certain things, what you'd endured, the impact it's having on you. And at some point, at my lowest, I understood that I really had to take this seriously. And I remember it happened actually mainly when I was living in France for a period, and we made Hollywood about 2015, 2016. And when I did come to Israel, I was 40 years old. I'm 47 now, almost 48. And I sought regular psychological help for ongoing basis psychoanalysis quite regularly, and then moved on to different forms of therapy. At the same time, it's not just about therapy, it's about physical activity. For me, for every person, it's different. Just like any PTSD sufferer may have different symptoms, may suffer in different ways. There are eating disorders, there are sexual issues, there are sounds like one like self-harm, inability to hold personal or professional relationships, holding down a job, uh, countless things. At the same time, there are also different healing experiences and opportunities that suit different people in different ways. And in my case, as I said, therapy was at the core. I think that I needed to go through a process of understanding myself and really try to improve and manage some of those challenges, especially back in a few years ago, the anxiety that I used to have. So besides from the therapy, there was the physical activity. I'm often 5 to 6 hours a day. And today I've done well over 4 hours of physical activity. There's also medical cannabis. I have a license here in Israel. And when I go to other countries, there are different options as well. Different things work for different people. And as I said, I've been at the lowest. So now I can also appreciate those who haven't been there. I remember one of the things I need to add is that when I did have that panic attack, I started to understand others who had experienced it and shared it with me much more. I suddenly was able to really relate to them, and I also recalled that I'd had those types of attacks, but I didn't know what it was from. It was just suddenly I burst out crying. It was just weird. And I was myself. I was in the military once when that happened, and I just didn't know how to explain any of it. But then through a process of healing and self-reflection and education and all of that, then I've come out in a much better place. But, it's sometimes you want to give up. It feels easier to give up. And the battle often is daily, sometimes even hourly, depending on the period that I'm going through. But overall, certainly in the last couple of years, I would honestly say that I've been in the best place that I've ever been.
What have you learned through your interactions with them?
The key lesson that I've learned over the last decade or so is that we cannot ignore our traumas. Ignoring them isn't going to help us. Some of us may be able to get away with it, certainly for periods of time, but ultimately it will catch up with you. And often it's at the wrong time and in the wrong place. There are ways of improving your life in managing your challenges and your diagnosis. Some people, even under the right care and the right guidance, they can overcome PTSD completely to such an extent that they are no longer diagnosed with PTSD. There are all these modern contemporary treatment options, whether it's psychedelics or whether it's pressure chambers here in Israel. They have plenty of those as well. There are some things that help individuals overcome things. And if they can't fully overcome, they can manage it. So that's one of the things I learned. I'm now much better at identifying triggers before they come and ensure that I protect myself in that kind of way, remove myself from certain situations, not put myself out there. For example, when a lot of people still reach out for support, I'll never turn my back on anyone obtaining the story from them. I will rather direct them to get the help that they may require. So it's about managing, using tools that will manage to prevent your triggers. And if you are occasionally triggered, as I am, it happens occasionally for all sorts of reasons in the lead up to the court process now that I'm about to go through in bringing my first perpetrator to justice. I've been triggered now for the last couple of months. It's challenging. It's a lot more challenging than it's been for the last few years. And it brought me back to the memories of the past, bad memories. But again, I know a lot of work, and this is the time to implement it. And it's about reaching out for support, family, friends, professional support. It's difficult now. I've learned to manage, as I said, to prevent the triggers from coming. But when they come, I'm better able to manage the issues that arise as well. I've got tools now, whether it's to go out, physical activity, whether it's to call a friend, whether it's to send a message to my therapist. There are many ways to deal with it. And you know what? Occasionally also to have a drink is okay. You don't have to really give everything up. It's about managing things and doing it in some sort of a balanced way.
Yeah, I suppose you're getting to the kind of heart of the difficult question here that strikes me, which is that on the one hand, you're trying to process your own trauma and heal.
Um,
And on the other hand, you're doing this incredibly important work
Yeah.
of raising awareness, of helping others find justice. And in a way, this advocacy has been your life's work for the last number of years. I guess, how does making that your life's work impact on your own healing journey?
That's again,
Hard one.
so it's part of the paradox that I
Yeah.
as well referred to earlier. It's like on the one hand, it's been part of my healing process. I remember when I was at my lowest, there were two main things that essentially kept me head above water, so to speak. And that was first and foremost in my children,
Yeah.
three boys. And for me, it was, I'm a father. I have a responsibility. I love them and I need to be here and be the best that I can be. So they've always been there in that way. And secondly, my life's work, which really did become a mission. I didn't seek it. It was essentially imposed on me. All I did was initially share my story publicly. And as I was saying, as a result of the feedback and the contacts from around the world of victims and survivors of abuse, their families, therapists, media, all sorts of people, stakeholders who had an interest in this issue. So it wasn't common for, especially a male survivor in the religious community, formally, to speak out about these things. This was in 2011. So it was really imposed on me. And I left my government job, counterterrorism, with great, remuneration and stability and safety. Left all of that, wasn't getting paid for the first few months, because I saw that it was something that was necessary and established civic back in Australia. And I personally helped many people, accompany them through the process, whether it's seeking therapy, whether it's going to the police and giving a statement, lawyers, whatever needed to be done. And ultimately, and that's the second part, that's where the not healing part of it comes into it. There's the concept of vicarious trauma, which I learned through this process, which is essentially that you're carrying the trauma of other people. And if you're not receiving regular, proper therapy and doing other self-care activities, exercise and all those things, you're going to get caught in that very difficult, deluge, basically. And that's essentially part of what happened to me as well. I just had to stop providing that direct victim support because it really took over my life, working 16-hour days at all sorts of hours because I know the courage of survivors to contact me for the first time ever. They want to share their story. And even if it's at midnight, I know how long that courage it took them to muster the courage to reach out to me. And if I ignore that, even for a little bit, they'll go to sleep and tomorrow they'll feel different and anxious and may not even want to speak to the family, wanted me to speak to their daughter because she was threatening suicide and needed me to be there to talk to her because I was the only one she would speak to. So those types of incidents impact. So there's the original trauma, there's the cover-up trauma, then there's the helping victims and survivors trauma, and then the constant, the bullying and you say, my parents, the excommunication some of my family endured. But then also, I was attacked regularly, and still I know some people look at me as someone who has caused significant harm, especially if they are connected to someone on the receiving end of justice or accountability. So having said all of that, I don't have regrets. I certainly could have done certain things maybe differently, better. I know that my intentions were always pure. It was about justice, accountability, and ensuring the safety of our children now to the future. And I'm proud of my achievements. A lot of people around me and myself, we all paid a significant price. That's why it was time to move on from focusing on child sexual abuse. Now, for me, it's really about discussing this issue of PTSD, of trauma. From my perspective, that's going to be now my life's mission, at least on a part-time basis, to really talk about this issue, share stories like the different contexts of PTSD, treatment options, the impact it has to really educate all of us, whether it's the community, those who have PTSD, those who feel symptoms and aren't sure what they have, their family members, so we can really learn from it. So many people have PTSD diagnosed, have many more are undiagnosed and walk around with the symptoms, just like I did, just like so many people I know do. So we really need to change the conversation. And I'm really delighted to have this opportunity to start this conversation with this particular episode with you, Julie. And I'm really looking forward to continuing the conversation, the healing process for so many of us.
Because it's a positive message that you're putting out there, isn't it? The message is that you can get over this.
Yes, absolutely. You can overcome them. As we were talking so much in depth, exactly. There's hope. There's a lot to enjoy about life. Sure, there are horrible experiences that many of us enjoy in life, but there is also so much beauty in life. And let me just say, Julie, thank you so much for making me feel very comfortable in talking about a very difficult subject. Even though I have spoken about this issue over many years, I don't do it as often in recent times. And I can tell you that it's so important that people need to understand to create a safe space. And I felt that and feel like you've created a safe space for me to be able to speak openly and honestly about this. So I would like to thank you for the opportunity, for your time, and for just being the great journalist I've always thought of you.
Well, thank you, Manny. Thank you for being honest with a difficult subject. Doesn't matter how many times you've talked about it over and over, it remains difficult. And I think a great many people are very grateful and will continue to be grateful for your advocacy in this area.
Thank you, Julie.